My name is Goldie, and at 32, I own an art gallery that showcases emerging artists in downtown Chicago. But 24 years ago, I was just an 8-year-old girl watching my family splinter into pieces. My dad took my brother, my mom took my sister, and nobody took me. After 2 decades of silence, they all suddenly want back into my life, expecting the same desperate child they abandoned. But that little girl is gone. In her place stands a woman who built herself from the ground up. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And be sure to subscribe if stories about overcoming abandonment resonate with you. Because trust me, this journey gets intense. Before everything fell apart, we were what most people would consider a normal family. We lived in a brick ranch house in suburban Chicago, complete with a tire swing in the backyard that my dad had hung from the massive oak tree. I can still picture the way the evening sun filtered through the leaves, creating dancing shadows across our small patch of lawn, where our golden retriever, Rusty, would chase us in endless circles until we all collapsed in giggling heaps. My dad, Jack, worked as a construction contractor. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and hands rough from years of manual labor. He smelled like sawdust and mint gum, a combination I found comforting whenever he scooped me up for a hug. My mom, Diane, worked part-time as a nurse at the local hospital. She had an infectious laugh that started soft and built until her whole body shook. Her dark blonde hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, but she'd let me brush it out at night, sometimes counting 100 strokes just like princesses in the storybooks. My brother Noah was 2 years older than me, 10, when everything changed. He was my protector, the one who taught me to ride a bike by running alongside me until I found my balance, then cheering wildly when I finally pedaled on my own. He collected baseball cards and knew all the statistics, which he would recite to me, even though I rarely understood their significance. What I did understand was the pride in his voice when he explained them. Sophie was my little sister, just 6 when our family fractured. She had wispy blonde curls and a habit of following me everywhere. I read her bedtime stories, making different voices for each character until she drifted off to sleep. She had a stuffed elephant named Ellie that went everywhere with her, one ear worn thin from constant handling. Our home wasn't fancy, but it was ours. My bedroom had glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the ceiling, a galaxy I'd stare at while falling asleep. The kitchen had yellow curtains my mom had sewn herself, and mismatched chairs around the dining table that Dad had rescued from various construction sites and refinished. Sundays were for pancakes. Dad would be at the stove flipping perfect golden circles while Mom sliced fruit. Noah would sneak chocolate chips into the batter when Dad wasn't looking, and Sophie would giggle as she watched him, her co-conspirator. I was in charge of setting the table, carefully placing each fork and knife, feeling so grown up with my responsibilities. Summer meant trips to Lake Michigan, where we'd spend entire days building sandcastles that Sophie would decorate with seashells and feathers. Mom would read paperback novels under an umbrella, while Dad taught Noah and me to swim past the breaking waves. Those nights, exhausted and sun-kissed, we'd get ice cream cones that dripped down our wrists as we watched the sunset paint the sky in watercolor pinks and purples. When I turned 8, Mom threw me a birthday party with a rainbow cake and balloons tied to every chair. My friends from school came over and we played freeze tag in the backyard until dusk. Dad set up a sprinkler for us to run through, and Mom took pictures with her old film camera, carefully documenting every moment. I remember feeling so special, so loved, completely unaware that this would be our last celebration as an intact family. Looking back, there were small signs of trouble I was too young to recognize. The way Dad's work seemed to fluctuate, some months bringing home plenty while others meant quiet conversations behind closed doors. Mom's increasing frustration with our financial instability, the tight smile she'd wear when bills arrived in the mail. But children don't typically notice these things unless they become impossible to ignore. For a long time, our home felt secure, warm, filled with the ordinary magic of family life. Game nights where Dad would dramatically accuse Mom of cheating at Monopoly. Weeknight dinners around the table where we each had to share the best part of our day. The way Mom would kiss each of our foreheads before school, leaving the faintest smell of her flowery perfume. All these small moments formed the foundation of my world, one I believed was as solid as the brick walls of our house. I didn't know then that foundations can crack, that homes built on love can still collapse. I couldn't have imagined a future where the five of us would become strangers, or that I would be the one left behind when everyone else moved on. The memories of that time are both precious and painful, a reminder of everything I lost and everything I had to rebuild on my own. The first real crack in our family's foundation appeared when Dad lost a major construction contract he had been counting on. I remember the night he came home hours later than usual, his face gray with defeat. Mom sent us kids to play in the basement, but their voices carried down the stairs as they had their first serious fight I'd ever witnessed. "How could you have banked everything on this one job, Jack?" Mom's voice was sharp, accusatory, in a way I'd never heard before. "It was a sure thing, Diane. How was I supposed to know they'd go with another company at the last minute?" Dad's voice boomed back, defensive and raw. That night, I heard Mom crying in their bedroom, the stossed, hiccuping sobs she tried to muffle with a pillow. Dad slept on the couch, and breakfast the next morning was a silent affair, tension thick enough to touch. In the weeks that followed, Mom started taking extra nursing shifts. She'd leave before we woke and sometimes return after we were in bed. Her absence created a hollow space in our daily routines. No one was there to help with homework or listen to stories about our school day. Dad tried to fill both roles, but he was distracted, constantly on the phone trying to secure new contracts while bills piled up on the kitchen counter. One night, I got up for a glass of water and overheard Dad on the phone in the kitchen. "I don't know how we're going to make the mortgage this month," he whispered harshly. "The savings are gone, and Diane's extra shifts barely cover the utilities." The fear in his voice made my stomach twist into knots. Noah withdrew into himself, spending more time in his room with the door closed. He stopped inviting friends over and quit his baseball team, claiming he just wasn't interested anymore. But I caught him staring at his glove sometimes, fingers running over the worn leather with longing. Sophie started having nightmares, waking up screaming about monsters under her bed. I'd crawl in beside her, stroking her hair until she drifted off to sleep, whispering reassurances I wasn't sure I believed anymore. Our parents were too wrapped up in their own struggles to notice how we were all reacting to the changing atmosphere of our home. Christmas that year was a shadow of previous celebrations. No tree, no presents, just a small dinner Mom prepared between shifts, during which our parents barely spoke to each other. Noah picked at his food while Sophie asked repeatedly when Santa was coming, questions our parents deflected until she finally stopped asking. In January, my grandparents visited. I overheard them talking to my parents in hushed, concerned tones. They offered help, though I didn't understand exactly what kind. Whatever it was, my parents refused. My father's pride was still intact despite everything else crumbling around us. "We'll figure this out ourselves," he insisted, while my grandmother's face creased with worry. Dad started drinking more heavily. Not every night, but often enough that the recycling bin filled with empty beer cans faster than before. He'd fall asleep watching television, sometimes not making it to bed at all. Mom became emotionally distant, going through the motions of caregiving without the warmth that characterized her interactions with us. Mornings became my responsibility. I'd get up early to make cereal for Sophie and Noah when our parents slept in or had already left for work. At 8 years old, I became the keeper of routines, making sure teeth were brushed and backpacks were ready for school. I'd walk Sophie to her classroom, promising to meet her after school, taking on a role no child should have to assume. One afternoon, I came home early from a friend's house and heard Mom on the phone in her bedroom. The door was cracked open, and through it I could see her sitting on the closed toilet lid, one hand rubbing her forehead as if warding off a headache. "I don't know what our options are anymore, Lisa," she was saying to my aunt. "The kids, I can't give them the life they deserve like this." There was a pause. "We've talked about separation, but what happens to the children then?
Who goes where? The cold dread that washed over me at those words still haunts me. Who goes where? As if we were furniture to be divided up in a divorce. The fighting escalated. One night it got so bad that Dad punched a hole in the living room wall. I watched from the staircase, frozen in fear, as Mom screamed that he was out of control. Noah pulled me back to my room where Sophie was already hiding under her blankets. The three of us huddled together on my bed, Noah's arm protectively around both of us as we listened to the sounds of our family imploding. Later that week, I found Mom crying alone in the bathroom. The door wasn't fully closed, and through it, I could see her sitting on the closed toilet lid, shoulders shaking silently.
I wanted to go to her, to offer the same comfort I gave Sophie after her nightmares, but something held me back. Maybe it was the realization that some hurts were too big for a child to fix. I started creating distraction games for my siblings. We built elaborate forts in the basement using old sheets and furniture. I invented scavenger hunts around the house and yard, anything to shield them from the reality of our disintegrating home life, to give them moments of normal childhood in the midst of chaos. But I couldn't distract myself from the truth. Something irreparable had broken between our parents. Dad moved into the basement guest room. The separation within our house felt like a prelude to something worse. I would lie awake at night, listening for sounds of reconciliation that never came, imagining scenarios where they worked things out and we returned to the family we'd been before. The day I found divorce papers in Mom's purse was the day hope died. I wasn't snooping, just looking for Gus, but there they were. Official documents with terms like dissolution of marriage and custody arrangement. I didn't understand all the legal language, but I understood enough. This wasn't temporary. This was the end. That evening, after we were supposed to be in bed, I sat at the top of the stairs and listened to my parents discussing which child would go where. The casual way they divided us still makes my blood run cold when I think about it. Noah should come with me, Dad said. He needs a male influence at his age. Fine, but Sophie stays with me, Mom replied. She's too young to be without her mother. I waited, breath held, for one of them to mention me, for one of them to fight for me, to claim me as Noah and Sophie had been claimed. But the conversation moved on to financial arrangements and visitation schedules, and my name never came up. It was as if I didn't exist, as if I were invisible to the very people who gave me life. That night, I cried silently into my pillow, careful not to wake Sophie, who had climbed into my bed again. I was facing the first devastating realization of my young life. In the redistribution of our family, there was no place set aside for me. The day everything changed forever started like any other. I woke up early, as had become my habit, and went downstairs to make breakfast. I found Dad and Noah in the living room, suitcases packed beside them. Dad was kneeling in front of Noah, hands on his shoulders, speaking in a low, serious voice. "We're going on a trip," Dad explained when he noticed me standing in the doorway. "Noah and I need some time away to figure things out." Noah looked confused, his eyes red-rimmed as if he had been crying. When he hugged me goodbye, he whispered, "I'll call you soon, I promise." His voice wobbled with uncertainty. I clung to him, somehow knowing this wasn't a normal trip, that something more permanent was happening. Dad barely looked at me as they left. "Be good for your mom, Goldie," he said quickly, before ushering Noah out to the car, where I noticed several garbage bags filled with what looked like clothes and toys, not luggage for a trip, belongings for a move. After they drove away, Mom locked herself in her bedroom and wouldn't come out. I heard her sobbing through the door, but my knocks went unanswered. Sophie kept asking where Dad and Noah had gone, and I didn't know what to tell her. We ate cereal for dinner that night, and I read Sophie 3 extra stories at bedtime, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. Mom remained in her room the next day.
I made peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, helped Sophie brush her teeth, and tried calling Dad's cell phone repeatedly. It went straight to voicemail every time. That night, Sophie and I slept together in my bed again, her small body curled against mine for the comfort we both desperately needed. On the third day, Mom emerged from her bedroom looking hollow-eyed and determined. She moved around the house with robotic efficiency, pulling out suitcases and filling them with Sophie's clothes and toys. When I asked what she was doing, she paused only briefly. "Sophie and I need a fresh start," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We're going to stay with Aunt Lisa for a while." "What about me?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "When are we coming back home?" Mom's expression flickered between guilt and resolve. "You'll stay here for now. We'll come back for you when things settle down, I promise." I didn't believe her, but I was 8 years old and powerless to stop what was happening. Sophie cried when she realized I wasn't coming, reaching for me from Mom's arms as they headed to the car. "Why can't Goldie come?" she wailed, her face red and streaked with tears. "Goldie needs to stay here in case your father comes back," Mom answered, a lie I recognized even then. "We'll be together again soon." Then they were gone, and I was alone in our house. Completely alone, at 8 years old. The first day by myself, I pretended it was an adventure. I ate ice cream for breakfast because there was no one to tell me not to. I watched TV shows Mom never allowed. I jumped on my parents' bed. But the freedom quickly gave way to fear as darkness fell, and the house made strange noises I'd never noticed before. I slept with all the lights on that night, Rusty curled protectively at my feet. The next morning, I realized no one had fed him. So I poured an entire box of cereal into his bowl, not knowing how much he needed, but wanting to make sure he had enough. By the third day alone, the food situation was becoming dire. I had exhausted the easy options like cereal and peanut butter sandwiches. The milk had gone sour. I didn't know how to cook anything requiring the stove or oven. Rusty and I shared crackers and cheese slices from the refrigerator. I kept calling Dad's phone and now Mom's too, but neither answered. I left tearful messages asking when they were coming back for me, begging not to be left alone anymore. The silence in response was deafening. On the fourth day, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Garcia from next door stood there with a concerned expression. She had noticed I was home alone and wanted to check if everything was okay. I lied, saying my mom had just gone to the store and would be back soon. But Mrs. Garcia saw through the lie, especially when Rusty bounded up behind me, clearly unfed and unwalked. "Where are your parents, sweetie?" she asked gently. I broke down then, telling her everything through gulping sobs. How Dad took Noah, Mom took Sophie, and nobody took me. How they promised to come back but hadn't called. How I was running out of food and was scared at night. Mrs. Garcia's face transformed from concern to horror as I spoke. She brought me to her house, fed me a proper meal, and called the authorities. By that evening, a social worker named Miss Jade Reynolds was sitting across from me in Mrs. Garcia's living room, asking questions I didn't have answers to. "Do you know where your parents went? Do you have grandparents or other relatives nearby?" "None close enough." "How long have you been alone?" 4 days. Mr. Day had a soft voice, but couldn't hide the pity in her eyes. That pity would become a familiar expression on the faces of adults in my life for years to come. She explained that I would need to go with her, that I couldn't stay in the empty house, that they would try to contact my parents. She let me pack a small bag of clothes and take my stuffed bear, Howard, that I'd had since I was a baby. Rusty went to the animal shelter. Another loss in a week full of them. The family court hearing a week later was cold and sterile, full of adults talking about me as if I weren't there. Neither of my parents appeared, though they'd apparently been notified. The judge, an older man with kind eyes but a stern mouth, declared me a ward of the state. Just like that, in less than 2 weeks, I went from being part of a family to being a case number in the foster care system. My first placement was with the Thompsons, a couple with 3 biological children who took in foster kids for the supplemental income. They weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. I slept on a pull-out couch in the basement family room. My belongings, what few I had, were kept in a black garbage bag, since there was no dresser or closet space for me. Their children regarded me with suspicion, never including me in their games or conversations. I wrote letters to Noah and Sophie, pouring my heart onto paper, telling them I missed them, and asking when we would see each other again. I addressed them to Aunt Lisa's house, the only place I thought Mom and Sophie might be. They came back weeks later, marked Return to Sender. No forwarding address. Once, I managed to call Dad's cell phone when Mrs. Thompson wasn't paying attention. A woman answered, her voice sharp with annoyance when I asked for my father. "He can't come to the phone," she said. "Who is this?" "It's Goldie, his daughter," I replied, hope surging that I'd finally made contact. There was a pause. "I'll tell him you called," she said, before the line went dead. He never called back. I left messages at Aunt Lisa's house too, calling when I knew Mrs. Thompson was occupied with her own children. My aunt's responses were vague and uncomfortable. "Your mom is going through a lot right now." Or,
At 14, hungry and desperate, I ran away. I spent 3 days living in a park, sleeping on benches and stealing food from grocery stores before the police found me and returned me to the foster care system. The Jacksons didn't want me back after my stunt, so I was placed in yet another temporary home while waiting for a more permanent placement. It was during this transition that my high school counselor, Miss Rivera, noticed something in me I had long stopped seeing in myself: potential. Despite my spotty attendance and inconsistent performance, my standardized test scores were exceptional. Miss Rivera began advocating for me, suggesting advanced placement classes and connecting me with school resources I hadn't known existed. "You're smart, Goldie," she told me during one of our weekly meetings. "Really smart. And that brain of yours is your ticket out of the situation you're in." My new placement was with Miss Harriet, an older single woman who had fostered dozens of teenagers over the years. She was neither overly affectionate nor coldly distant, instead offering clear boundaries and consistent expectations. Her house was modest but comfortable, with bookshelves lining nearly every wall. "I don't expect you to call me Mom," she said on my first night there. "I'm not trying to replace anyone. But while you're here, you'll have stability, respect, and opportunities. What you make of them is up to you." For the first time in years, I experienced genuine stability. Miss Harriet maintained the same routines day after day: dinner at 6, homework until 8, reading time until 9:30, lights out at 10. She checked my assignments, not to criticize, but to offer help if needed. She attended parent-teacher conferences and advocated for me when teachers underestimated my abilities. I discovered solace in art during those years with Miss Harriet. She noticed me doodling constantly and bought me proper sketch pads and pencils. I spent hours in my room drawing, expressing on paper the emotions I couldn't verbalize. Miss Harriet never pried, but she hung my better pieces in the hallway, a quiet acknowledgement of my talent. By my junior year of high school, Miss Rivera and Miss Harriet were both encouraging me to consider college, something that had seemed impossible before. They helped me research scholarships for foster youth and guided me through application essays. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future beyond the system that had defined my adolescence. Then, during my senior year, Miss Harriet received a diagnosis of terminal cancer. She told me directly, without drama or excessive emotion. "I have 6 months, maybe less," she said over our regular Sunday breakfast. "I've updated my will and spoken to your social worker. You'll need a new placement to finish out the school year." I was 17, less than a year away from aging out of the system anyway. The thought of another move, another adjustment, was exhausting. But more than that, I was facing the loss of the only adult who had consistently shown up for me in nearly a decade. Miss Harriet declined quickly. Within 3 months, she was in hospice care, and I was back in a temporary placement. This time with a couple who fostered mainly for religious reasons and tried daily to convert me to their particular brand of faith. I visited Miss Harriet every day after school until she passed, holding her hand and reading aloud from her favorite books. Her funeral was small but dignified, attended mainly by former foster kids whose lives she had touched. We were a motley crew of different ages, backgrounds, and life outcomes, united by our experience in her home. It was the first time since my family's abandonment that I felt genuine grief, a measure of how rare meaningful connections had become in my life. 2 months later, I turned 18 and aged out of the foster care system. I had a high school diploma, acceptance to community college based on scholarships for former foster youth, and $752 in savings from part-time jobs. I had no family to call, no home to return to, and no safety net if I failed. With my meager savings, I secured a spot in a shared apartment with 3 other girls, all students at different colleges around Chicago. The apartment was small, the neighborhood questionable, but it was the first space that felt truly mine, even if I was only renting one corner of it. I enrolled in community college while working 2 jobs, morning shifts at a local diner and evenings at a retail store in the mall. Between working and classes, I averaged 5 hours of sleep a night, but the exhaustion felt purposeful, different from the bone-deep weariness of my years in foster care. This tiredness came with paychecks, with credits accumulating toward a degree, with forward momentum. During my second semester, I enrolled in an art history class as an elective. The professor, Dr. Mason, noticed my drawings in the margins of my notes and asked to see more of my work. Reluctantly, I showed him my sketchbook, expecting the kind of vague encouragement adults often offered children to be polite. Instead, he was genuinely impressed. "You have a natural understanding of composition and light," he said, flipping through pages of portraits and landscapes I'd created. "Have you considered pursuing art seriously?" The thought had never crossed my mind. Art had been my escape, my therapy, never a potential career. But Dr. Mason's interest sparked something. He connected me with the college's art department, helped me apply for a specific scholarship for fine art students, and mentored me through building a proper portfolio. By the end of my second year at community college, I'd secured a full scholarship to complete my bachelor's degree at the state university. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel genuine pride in my accomplishments, to recognize that I had created opportunities for myself despite starting with nothing. Moving into university housing introduced me to Zoe, who would become my first real best friend since childhood. She was studying business, practical and ambitious, but with a creativity that complemented my more artistic tendencies. We stayed up late talking about everything and nothing, the kind of easy friendship I'd observed others having, but never experienced myself. "You never talk about your family," she noted, one night as we shared a pizza in our dorm room. "Don't have one," I replied, the practiced casualness of years smoothing over the pain of the admission. Zoe didn't push, didn't offer empty sympathy. She just nodded and said, "Well, you can share mine for the holidays if you want. My mom always cooks enough for an army anyway." That simple offer of inclusion meant more than she could know. For the next 3 years, I spent Thanksgivings and Christmases with Zoe's boisterous family, watching their easy affection with each other, learning what healthy family dynamics looked like. It was both healing and painful, a glimpse of what I had missed, but also what was possible. During my junior year, I secured a work-study position at the campus gallery, assisting with exhibition installations and administrative tasks. I discovered I had a talent not just for creating art, but for curating it, for understanding how pieces work together to tell a cohesive story. I found myself drawn to the business side as much as the creative aspects, fascinated by the intersection of art and commerce. That same year, I met James in an advanced painting class.
He was thoughtful and patient, never pushing for more information than I was ready to give about my past. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared interests. He was the first person I told the full story of my abandonment, sitting on his apartment floor at 3 o'clock in the morning, words spilling out after years of careful containment. "I kept waiting for you to have trust issues," he said when I'd finished. I laughed through tears. "What do you think this is? I've known you for 8 months, and I'm just now telling you why I never talk about my childhood." He smiled, pushing my hair back from my face. "Fair point. But you're here. You're letting me in. That takes incredible courage after what you've been through." James helped me see that my defensive walls, while necessary for survival, were also preventing me from fully experiencing life. With his encouragement, I began therapy through the University Counseling Center, finally addressing the abandonment trauma I'd carried alone for so long. Graduation came with bittersweet triumphs. I received my diploma with honors, walked across the stage to the tears of Zoe and James, but felt the absence of family acutely. No parents beaming with pride, no siblings waving enthusiastically from the audience. Even after all those years, there was still a hollow space where those connections should have been. After graduation, I leveraged my gallery experience into an assistant position at a small contemporary art space in Chicago. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but it was in my field, a foot in the door of the art world. I shared an apartment with Zoe, who'd secured an entry-level marketing job, and continued my therapy sessions, determined to build a healthier relationship with my past. My career progressed steadily. Within 2 years, I was promoted to associate curator, responsible for discovering new artists and conceptualizing exhibitions. The gallery director recognized my eye for emerging talent and my ability to communicate with artists effectively, skills that set me apart from my peers. But personal growth wasn't as straightforward as professional advancement. One day, walking down Michigan Avenue, I spotted a man who resembled my father. Same build, same gait, same way of tilting his head while waiting to cross the street. The panic attack hit without warning, leaving me gasping for breath on a busy sidewalk, disoriented and suddenly 8-year-old Goldie again, watching him drive away with my brother. That incident set me back to therapy with renewed commitment.
They made horrible decisions, but they've changed. And you think that excuses abandoning a child? I asked, my anger finally breaking through the shock that had dominated my reactions until now. "No, of course not," he backpedaled quickly. "Nothing excuses that. But people can regret their worst mistakes, right? They want a chance to apologize, to try to make things right." I laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Make things right. I spent 10 years in the foster system, Noah. Do you have any idea what that was like? He didn't, of course. How could he? While I was moving from home to home, my belongings stuffed into garbage bags, he was living with our father, playing baseball, and having a normal adolescence despite the fracture in our family. I found myself in an uncomfortable position, acting as a messenger between relatives who hadn't communicated directly in years. Noah spoke with Sophie regularly, but had limited contact with our parents. Sophie talked to our mother weekly, but rarely engaged with our father. Everyone seemed to have complicated relationships with each other, yet they were suddenly united in their desire to reconnect with me. Sophie called a week after Noah's initial contact. Her voice was both familiar and strange. The little girl's high pitch replaced by a woman's tones, but with the same emotional openness I remembered. "I never forgot you," she said, crying within minutes of our conversation. "I had this picture of you for my 6th birthday party. I kept it hidden because it made Mom sad to see it, but I looked at it every night before bed for years." Unlike Noah, who approached our reconnection with careful pragmatism, Sophie swung between tearful nostalgia and enthusiastic plans to make up for lost time. She wanted immediate closeness, suggesting visits and shared holidays, as if 2 decades of separation could be bridged in a single leap. When I asked why she hadn't looked for me sooner, her answer revealed the family mythology that had developed in my absence. "I thought you were with Grandma and Grandpa," she admitted. "That's what Mom told me when I was little. By the time I found out the truth in high school, no one seemed to know where you were. The reasons offered for my abandonment varied depending on who was explaining. Noah cited financial strain and our parents' mental health struggles. Sophie mentioned poor decision-making during a crisis. Both acknowledged it was wrong, but framed it as a tragic mistake rather than the deliberate choice it had been. I learned that our parents had told extended family I was living with an aunt during those years, a fiction that preserved their image as caring parents who had simply been overwhelmed by circumstances. No one had questioned this narrative deeply enough to uncover the truth, that I had been left alone and subsequently entered state care. My friends were divided on how I should respond to these sudden overtures from my long-absent family. Zoe was protective, suspicious of their motives, and worried about the emotional toll reconnection might take. "They abandoned you once," she pointed out bluntly. "What's to stop them from disappearing again when it gets difficult?" Michael was more measured, suggesting I proceed with caution, but remain open to the possibility of healing on my terms. "You don't owe them forgiveness," he said, "but you might find some peace in hearing them out." My therapist helped me navigate the complex emotions that surfaced with each new contact. The anger I thought I'd processed years ago returned with fresh intensity. The grief over lost years felt raw again. And underneath it all, a small, persistent voice still belonged to the 8-year-old inside me. Why didn't they want me then? Why do they want me now? I agreed to meet Noah for coffee when he came to Chicago for a work conference. Seeing him in person was surreal, like looking at a funhouse mirror version of our father, features familiar, yet altered by time and genetics. He had Dad's height and build, but carried himself differently, without the restless energy I remembered. His children called me Aunt Goldie during a video call he initiated at the cafe. The title felt both foreign and painful. These children, who shared my blood but knew nothing about me, who had only heard stories of an aunt who existed primarily in their father's childhood memories. "Dad wants to talk to you," Noah said toward the end of our meeting, fidgeting with his coffee cup. "He's not well, Goldie. The doctors are saying 6 months, maybe a year. He wants to make peace." His voice trailed off, leaving the implication hanging between us. The request for forgiveness from a dying man might have moved me, but it instead only intensified my anger. Why was I expected to provide absolution on his timeline? Where had this desire for reconciliation been during the years I needed a father? A package arrived at my gallery the following week. The return address bore my mother's name in Ohio. A jolt ran through me at the sight of her handwriting, still recognizable after all those years. Inside was a worn teddy bear I thought I'd lost forever. My childhood companion, Howard, preserved all this time. There was a note. "I kept him safe for you. I should have kept you safe too. I'm so sorry, Goldie. Please call when you're ready. Love, Mom." The presumption in that signature, claiming a relationship she had forfeited 2 decades earlier, made me set the note aside. But I kept Howard, placing him on a shelf in my bedroom, a tangible link to the child I had been. The formal invitation to the family reunion came next, an awkwardly worded card requesting my presence at a lake house in Michigan, the same place we'd vacationed as an intact family. The location was clearly chosen for its sentimental value, but the memories it evoked were complicated, tainted by the knowledge of what came after those seemingly happy times. I stood at a crossroads, pulled between the family I had lost and the life I had built without them. They were asking me to step back into a role I had long outgrown. The youngest daughter, the baby sister, the missing piece in their family portrait. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had become someone entirely in their absence, forged by experiences they knew nothing about and could never truly understand. The decision I made about whether to attend that reunion would define not just my relationship with my biological family moving forward, but my relationship with myself and the journey that had brought me to this point. After weeks of deliberation and intensive therapy sessions, I made my choice. I would meet with my family, but not on their terms. Not at the lake house with its complicated memories, not as part of a celebratory reunion pretending 2 decades of abandonment could be erased with cake and nostalgic reminiscing. Instead, I proposed a dinner at a neutral location,
a restaurant near my gallery where I would feel grounded. I wrote detailed letters to each family member beforehand, explaining exactly what had happened to me after they left. Not the sanitized version they might have imagined, but the harsh reality of foster care. The Thompsons with their black garbage bags for my belongings. Mrs. Williams with her cutting remarks. The Jacksons who used food as punishment. The constant relocations. The loss of all stability. The years of feeling unwanted and disposable. I'm not writing this to hurt you, I explained in each letter, but if there's going to be any relationship moving forward, it needs to be based on truth, not comfortable fictions. You need to know who I became in your absence. Michael offered to accompany me to the dinner, a buffer against whatever emotional storm might await. I appreciated his support, but declined. This was something I needed to face alone, on my terms, with the strength I had built over a lifetime of self-reliance. The evening of our meeting, I arrived early, selecting a table with a clear view of the entrance. I watched as they arrived together, my estranged family, instantly recognizable despite the years apart. Dad, thinner than I remembered, hair now gray, moving with careful steps of someone managing pain. Mom, her face lined, but still beautiful, nervously adjusting her necklace. Noah hovering protectively at Dad's side. Sophie scanning the restaurant anxiously until her eyes landed on me. The shock of seeing them together after 24 years was physical, a tightness in my chest that momentarily stole my breath. These people who once formed the entirety of my world were now strangers with familiar faces. I stood as they approached, accepting brief, awkward hugs from each. The physical contact felt both alien and achingly familiar. "You look so beautiful," Mom said, tears already forming in her eyes. "So grown up." "That tends to happen in 20 years, I replied, my voice steady but spite the storm under the surface. The initial conversation was strained, filled with safe topics and cautious questions. How was my gallery doing? Did I enjoy living in Chicago? Was I seeing someone special? I answered politely but briefly, watching them exchange glances, clearly unsure how to bridge the massive gulf between us. Dad cleared his throat during a lull in the conversation. "Goldie, we owe you an apology. What happened, what we did, there's no excuse for it. But there were reasons." Mom interrupted quickly. "We were in such a terrible place financially, emotionally. I was suffering from depression, though I didn't recognize it then. My father was drinking too much. We thought we were making the best decision for everyone at the time." I looked at her steadily. "What exactly was the best decision for me, Mom? Being left alone in an empty house at 8 years old?" The table fell silent. Sophie stared at her plate while Noah shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Dad's face flushed with shame or anger. I couldn't tell which. "It wasn't supposed to be like that," he finally said. "I thought your mom was taking you. She thought you were coming with me. By the time we realized what had happened, you were already in the system, and we were told it would be complicated to get you back." "Complicated?" I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. "So you decided not to try because it was complicated?" "I couldn't handle all 3 kids alone," Dad admitted, not meeting my eyes. "I was barely managing with Noah. And Sophie needed me completely," Mom added. "She was so young, so